Its name evokes a murky memory in the annals of history. An important yet obscure event. But for anyone who lived through it, one impossible to forget. Mount St. Helens, the mountain in the great American West that exploded in one of the biggest volcanic eruptions of all time.
It was, like somebody had moved the mountain down.
And it looked like a prehistoric landscape. If there had been a pterodactyl, I wouldn't have been surprised.
What happened on May 18, 1980, prompting this closely monitored volcano to blow up without warning and kill 57 people, many of whom have never been found? What was brewing in the bowels of the Earth in the preceding weeks that triggered this staggering explosion?
You expect volcanoes to erupt, but you don't expect mountains to instantaneously fall apart.
My son David said, Dad, are we going to die now?
We'll take an up-close look at the most well-documented volcanic eruption in history, filmed in real time, with insight from top experts and first-hand accounts from people whose lives were upended that fateful day.
When the sky is falling, you get scared. And these are rocks falling from the sky.
We could see trees being snapped down just like toothpicks. It was a surreal sight. It's something out of a movie.
The lake and all its water were displaced, so there was a tsunami on top of the eruption.
Those of us in geology, geophysics knew there were volcanoes and that had erupted, but you never believe it's going to happen now.
Here is the massive Mount St. Helens eruption, a disaster that spiraled out of control. Sunday, May 18th, 1980. It's 8 a.m. in the U.S. state of Washington, in the Pacific Northwest. It's a very exciting day for geologist Dorothy Stoffel. The scientist and her husband Keith are going to fly over a volcano that has just settled down after an active phase. It spewed black smoke and threatened to erupt for 22 days. But its fury seems to have abated. A good time to take a closer look.
We remembered Mount St. Helens as the place to ski. When we got there, the mountain looked pretty black. It was covered in dark ash. We could see streams of water in certain areas of the north side, which glistened in the sun. And I turned to Keith and I said, Keith, look at that. There's water on the north side. And I said to Keith, that must mean the heat is getting close to the surface.
At 8:32, 150 meters from the summit, the geologist captures these images with her camera. Extraordinary shots, given what would come next.
As soon as I took that picture and was taking the second picture, just click, click, but right beneath our feet, the whole north half of the mountain began to almost liquefy. Oh my! This is the big one. This is going to be huge eruption, and here we are, directly above the mountain. I say as a geologist, you expect volcanoes to erupt, but you don't expect mountains to instantaneously fall apart.
Dorothy is unknowingly witnessing one of the most incredible landslides in recorded history. 3 billion cubic meters of rock suddenly come crashing down. The land isn't the only thing that shifts this day. The eruption displaces the surrounding air as well. A blast of hot gases billows out at 1,065 kilometers per hour, nearly the speed of sound. It's too much for Dorothy's plane.
The blast was enormous. Keith said to Bruce, "We have to stay away from that. It might be 1,000 degrees." Bruce put the plane into a nosedive to gain speed to try to outrun the blast. And even at that, in the nosedive, our little plane was only doing 180 miles an hour, and the blast was 600 miles an hour. It was like seeing the ground coming up like this. And at the moment, I thought, Bruce is gonna nose this airplane right into the ground. Well, I understand crashing. I don't really understand what it would be like to be engulfed in this blast cloud that's chasing us. And I was thinking we weren't going to survive. I thought of my mother, and I thought, I'm going to disappear, and Mother's never gonna know what happened to me.
The scientist never dreamed she'd get an up-close look at an event this astounding. But now her life is in danger, along with everyone else living in the vicinity. The monster will claim its first victims in short order, ravaging a region that was a pristine paradise before this fateful day. Tuesday, March 18th, 1980. 2 months before the eruption. The volcano towers up in the wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. A peaceful home of 4 million Americans, including Seattle's 500,000 residents.
The Pacific Northwest is one of the most beautiful places in the world to live. You've got the mountains, you've got the land, you've got the water, you've got the ocean.
These mountains, of course, invite you to climb them. And the process is a great thing of beauty.
It was just wildlife down there. A lot of fir trees, very often trees in many places will be 50 to 70 feet tall. It was, I think the word we often use is pristine, because it still seemed largely untouched.
It is a bountiful land, thanks to its fertile mountains. 7 of the 452 volcanoes in the Pacific Ring of Fire rise up here, in the Cascade Mountain Range. The locals are proud of their volcanoes, which have turned into majestic mountains. And they haven't gone fully extinct, making them all the more enthralling.
We actually consider them all active, but just not currently active necessarily. But any one of them can erupt.
There is some danger, but compared to the human lifetime, it doesn't happen very often.
This spectacular and timeless slice of the American West is a delightful place. But soon it will show a very different face.
My name is Steve Malone, and when 1980 arrived, I was already studying the volcanoes in the Pacific Northwest. But what happened that spring was a big shock.
At 3:47 p.m. on Thursday, March 20th, 1980, seismologist Steve Malone notices an alarming sign. 150 kilometers from his office in Seattle, the seismographs monitoring the Cascade Mountains detect an unusually powerful earthquake.
That's a pretty good sized event. It's not huge or anything, but anything that size would get our attention.
Well, this was the biggest earthquake that had happened in that region in about 16 years.
Where is the quake source located? Where's the epicenter? In this part of the country, earth tremors are usually caused by shifting tectonic plates. But the region's volcanoes can trigger a different kind of earthquake.
Volcanic earthquakes are those events which respond to stress changes due to the molten rock or magma ascending or changing its position below or within the volcano.
An earthquake under a volcano is a bad sign. It usually means the magma is moving and could be pushed upward. So it came as a surprise and was cause for concern.
Concern grows over the day, as the first tremor is followed by a string of small earthquakes.
This started to get old. And we were dashing around trying to locate events and realized that almost all of the earthquakes were relatively shallow, and they were right at Mount St. Helens.
The concerns spark fear a real disaster could be brewing. Because Mount St. Helens isn't a run-of-the-mill mountain, it's a volcano. A highly dangerous stratovolcano, identifiable by its striking cone shape.
So it's a little bit like a torte or a big birthday cake with many, many layers creating this volcanic edifice.
Towering 3,000 meters high and permanently covered in snow, Mount St. Helens is often referred to as America's Mount Fuji. But the comparison ends there. Mount St. Helens is younger and far more active than the 100,000-year-old Japanese volcano.
Mount St. Helens that we see today, most of it is less than 4,000 years old. Most of Mount St. Helens that we see today is younger than the pyramids of Egypt.
Mount St. Helens is a relatively young and smaller volcano than many, but it has had a long history of frequent eruptions, some of them explosive. So it's a sort of special volcano within the Cascade Range.
A special volcano whose last major eruption dates back to April 17, 1857. And as often happens, it was preceded by a string of tiny tremors. Which is why scientists fear Mount St. Helens could be gearing up for another big explosion. But they have no idea how big it will be. Thursday, March 27, 1980. At 1700, Mount St. Helens sends out the first sign of what's brewing underground. Plumes of steam start spewing from the summit, creating a 75-meter-wide crater. The volcano is officially erupting.
It's sort of like a geyser. It heats up and then erupts.
My first name is Jeff, last name is Renner. I was a science journalist for a TV station. My job essentially was to cover science stories, and I specialized in environmental and earth science stories at that time.
We are directly over Mount St. Helens right now, and there is no question at all that the volcanic activity has begun.
We flew down at that point and flew over the crater, and you could see that opening that occurred, and there was a little smudge of ash, old rock, that had been blasted out with it.
You can see smoke and ash pouring from the top of the mountain, especially on the north side of the mountain.
It just looked like something was getting ready to happen.
Volcanologists call this sort of display a phreatic eruption. magma comes in contact with underground water, generating vast amounts of steam and raising the pressure inside the volcano to the bursting point.
Jacques-Marie Badenzef, volcanologist, Paris-Saclay University. The volcano is full of water. The magma is down deep, but it's 1,000 degrees Celsius. Earth and heat waves start rising, and the water temperature jumps to 100 degrees, hot enough to vaporize the water. It becomes overpressured, like a pressure cooker, and the summit explodes.
Those of us in geology, geophysics knew there were volcanoes and that had erupted in the recent geologic past, and certainly could. Ones were more dangerous than others, but you never believe it's going to happen now.
One of nature's most riveting displays, but also a highly dangerous one. Plumes of steam, ash, and rock are blasted 3,300 meters into the air, forming a huge dense dust cloud that builds up static electricity and generates its own lightning bolts.
I am Richard Waite with the U.S. Geological Survey. When Mount St. Helens started to become interesting in 1980, I was one of those who came up for the early eruption. Nothing like this had happened in the United States since 1915, and nobody living now has seen anything like this, so it was quite dramatic. Scientists are intrigued by it, more than intrigued, excited by it. Everybody, people are just fascinated by this phenomenon.
The warning lights are flashing red now, and will be for hours, because St. Helens is erupting, and it can get a lot worse.
Tuesday, April 8th, 1980. 12 days have gone by since the first eruption. 12 days of watching the crater steadily grow from 100 to 260 meters. It's already 3 times wider. Roadblocks have been set up to keep people safely away, but they're still flocking to see the monster up close. And none of them realize how dangerous the situation truly is.
Everybody wanted to see an eruption. It was becoming a tourist attraction. Everyone was buying T-shirts that noted, somewhat facetiously, like, oh yeah, Mount St. Helens, well, this isn't going to do very much,
It was like the carnival. You had people setting up Hawaiian barbecue chicken stands. They were selling souvenirs, and people would just come down. They were selling silly hats. It's like anything that might occur.
At that point, it was pretty much a circus. You could drive up to St. Helens, and you would see it looked like a parking lot of mobile TV outlets and the occasional, news helicopter flying over.
But today, a new warning sign appears. The sightseers haven't even noticed, but scientists have been monitoring it for hours. The whole mountain has started bulging.
They called it like a pregnant volcano.
845.
They thought, yes, this is unstable, but they had no idea how huge of a problem it was.
It's a bad sign. For now, it's a phreatic eruption, but the bulging means it could turn magmatic very quickly.
This new looming eruption is the most dangerous kind. A mountain bulges when it's trying to contain a strong upward surge of magma. And surprisingly, the magma isn't flowing up through the old eruption vent.
This magma is highly viscous but soft. Magma from previous eruptions has cooled and hardened inside the vents. It's rock hard. The new magma is hot and thick. It's easier for it to flow up outside the vent through the mountain's north flank.
Magma flows wherever it can. It's lazy. It takes the easiest path. So when it finds an outlet on the north flank, it turns that way and starts piling up.
The north flank starts bulging and moves northward, as if it's about to slide off. The sticky magma is still trapped inside, but it's piling up. The volcano is bulging and it's about to explode.
But the volcano's alarming state is invisible to the naked eye. Despite the warnings, Mount St. Helens continues to draw huge crowds. The paradox between the calm surface and the danger brewing underground is even debated on TV. Scientists are called in to assess the threat.
We don't know if we're very close to slides at this point or whether we're not close.
They spar with skeptics who are convinced nothing bad will happen.
And I couldn't understand how in the world the mount could ever get me in Spirit Lake. I don't think it can.
You had the debate of people that, again, said scientists simply don't know what they're talking about. They're being overly cautious.
Jeff Renner is a 27-year-old journalist at the time. Sent in to cover the event, he finds a surrealistic scene.
We were living out of a tent, and we were getting ready to do a broadcast, and this car drives up. And these two guys came out. I think they had been having a bit of a good time, and they said, "You want an eruption? We'll give you an eruption." And they began to pick up rocks like that big, throw them in the air, and they'd land on their car, and they'd say, "That's what we can expect with an eruption."
People feel very privileged to live in the vicinity of these big cascade volcanoes. And so that makes it all the more difficult for them to understand the volcanic processes that form these volcanoes and that threaten their lives.
But one man is fully aware of the looming danger. David Johnston is a young volcanologist who's been monitoring the volcano around the clock. He's talking to the media as well, but instead of lobbing rocks at reporters, he uses them to get his message out. Mount St. Helens is in a state similar to a volcano in Russia. Mount Bezymyany erupted 24 years before Mount St. Helens. This eruption wiped out 500 square kilometers of vegetation. This represents an area 5 times as large as the city of Paris. If humans are around when this happens, they have little chance of survival.
If there's an explosion, it's probable that the debris, the very hot incandescent ash that would come down, could come down all sides. But right now, there's a very great hazard due to the fact that the glacier is breaking up on this side of the volcano, on the north side, and that could produce a very large avalanche hazard.
We were doing an interview, and he said, "Where we're standing right now, it's like standing next to a keg of dynamite. The fuse is lit. We just don't know how long that fuse is." And he said, if it were to erupt right now, we would die.
Everybody had somewhat different opinions, but the more time went on, the more feeling there was it's probably going to erupt. But we certainly cannot tell when.
A question Americans have been hotly debating for 12 days. When will the giant unleash its anger? The answer will come very shortly, and even the most attentive experts will be taken by surprise. Saturday, May 17th, 1980. A month has gone by since the mountain first started bulging. Scientists are still worried, but the bulge seems to have stopped growing. Skeptics who've been scoffing at a magma explosion appear to be right.
The seismic activity drops off. After a while, the phreatic eruptions stop as well. People start asking, why can't we just go home?
Maybe that's the end of the situation. Maybe it will stop. Or maybe it will cause a failure of the volcano, which will uncork the bottle, so to say, and allow more magma to come out in a very explosive way.
the governor of the state decides to temporarily open the evacuation zone. Everyone is free to wander around Mount St. Helens, incredulously, as witnessed by these people interviewed that day.
You don't mind working in the shadow of the mountain, then?
No, not at all. There's nothing to be scared of. More dangerous than one of them trees falling on the backside than there is a mountain of exploding.
As far as we know, it's just a joke. Well, not really a joke, I guess, but it could last 100 years.
But it's the quiet ones you have to watch out for, as scientists like volcanologist Carolyn Dreger know all too well. On May 17, 1980, she sets out with a friend to study the volcano's glaciers. They run into the young volcanologist David Johnston. A meeting that will remain etched deep in her memory, because the clock is already ticking down to the big blast.
And David said, you know, I don't think that this is really the safest place to be. And he said, well, you see that bulge over there, that slope, that could fail. And if it does, it will come rushing over here. And so let's just reduce the number of people who are at risk. David Johnson played a large role in our destiny. He saved our lives.
And yet people keep pouring in.
My name is Venus Durgan. At the time of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, I was 20 years old.
Venus Durgan and her boyfriend Roald are camping along the Toutle River, 45 kilometers from the volcano.
This camping trip was our first kind of overnight get-together since we had returned from both of our trips. We just loaded all of our camping gear in the car. We were over 30 miles away, so we couldn't even see Mount St. Helens from the camping area that we were at.
Keith Ronholm, a 28-year-old geophysics student, is hunkered down 16 kilometers from the volcano, watching for any sign of activity.
I can see Mount St. Helens off in the distance. There are no activities. There's no steam. There's no plume above the summit. I thought, well, I'll just sit down on the ground and leaned against the wheel of the car and read my book and had a beer. So I had a very enjoyable afternoon and went to bed.
I didn't think it was going to amount to anything either, and it was just going to go to sleep again, but it did not.
But a few short hours later, on the morning of Sunday, May 18th, 1980, the big blast scientists have been fearing is about to come. David Johnston, the geologist who's been monitoring the bulge, will be the first victim.
He tells his colleagues nothing's moving. No change since yesterday. It's bulging, but nothing noteworthy to report.
Rien notable.
But I can see the gray cone of Mount St. Helens illuminated by the morning sun. And I'm a little disappointed that nothing's happening, and I'd driven all this way, and I'd really like to see something happen.
They don't expect anything new that day. Then at 8:32 Pacific time. There's a major explosion.
On May 18, 1980, at precisely 8:32 and 30 seconds, after 3 months of alarm signs, Mount St. Helens violently explodes in a major magmatic eruption, just as scientists had feared. It's a cataclysmic 15 megaton blast, as powerful as 27,000 of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima.
Out of nowhere, one more earthquake occurred that somehow destabilized the north side of the mountain, and the whole thing slid away. And that started the cataclysmic eruption.
As the magma works its way out, pressure builds in the molten rock and causes the trapped gases to explode.
So the landslides had been sitting on top of this magma, intruding the volcano, keeping it sort of corked in. And it's a bit like, I mean, the analogy would be like agitating a champagne bottle and then pulling the cork on it. And so the stuff underneath froths and comes out the top.
It's an explosion so powerful it splits the volcano literally in half. 3 billion cubic meters of rock break off in a split second, sending the north flank hurtling downward at over 175 kilometers per hour. And it's just the start. The avalanche unleashes the magma, causing it to explode.
The magma is a few hundred meters underground. It's pushing upward, but the mountain flank is holding it back. Then the flank suddenly slides off, and all that overpressured magma bursts out like a shotgun blast.
The blast sends up a giant cloud of gas, ash, magma, and pulverized rock.
It isn't a huge blast, but it's extremely violent and produces tremendous energy. It travels incredibly fast and far, and is burning hot, 500 to 600 degrees Celsius.
The blast is frighteningly fast, moving 1,065 kilometers per hour. As these images show, it zooms out far ahead of the unfolding landslide. These two phenomena combine to create a powerful blast of air that whips up the water in Lake Spirit, 6 kilometers northwest of the volcano, creating a wave 180 meters tall.
It ejects the water. It pushes the water ahead of it. The water runs up Spirit Lake. Spirit Lake has got 2 arms. Both of them are narrowing. So it pushes them up into the narrowing arm.
The lake and all its water are displaced, creating a tsunami on top of the eruption.
Many people will find themselves caught up in these destructive mechanics. 16 kilometers away, Keith Ronholm is sitting in his van when suddenly...
I'm reading along, and suddenly I hear some yelling. And I glanced over, and the entire north side of Mount St. Helens was sliding down. And I couldn't believe my eyes. Oh, I'm going to see an eruption.
Ronholm climbs out of his van and captures the moment on film. His series of photographs shows how the explosion unfolded second by second.
And I noticed that the entire cone of Mount St. Helens was now obscured by this gray, churning mass of cloud. And I thought, wow, that's getting big pretty fast.
Far from the volcano, protected by 2 crest lines, Keith thinks he's safe. But he quickly realizes he's sorely mistaken.
As it hits the first ridge, it starts to tumble and churn like it's a wave hitting a breakwater and just splashing over it.
Meanwhile, Dorothy Stoffel is flying over the volcano with her husband Bruce, who's trying to steer the airplane away from the blast.
I couldn't take picture. For something that huge to be happening, we were in serious trouble. Keith started yelling, "Oh, neat, oh, neat, oh, neat. We're probably going to not survive." This is it.
Back on the ground, Keith Ronholm watches the wave of ash roll over the second crest and barrels straight toward him.
At that point, I had gone from not being scared to, oh my, it's coming, I better get out of here. So I took one picture and I kept driving. And then I could see above my head this mushroom cloud with this wall of cloud behind me.
A giant mushroom cloud, like the one that swallowed up Pompeii 2,000 years ago. The landslide and blast are the precursors of a far more devastating phenomenon that is fast approaching. Sunday, May 18th, 1980, 8:37 a.m. Mount St. Helens has been exploding for 5 minutes. A colossal cloud has formed high in the atmosphere, threatening nearby populations. This time, the volcano spews its anger vertically instead of laterally. It gathers up ambient air and builds what scientists call an eruption column.
Cool air coming in feeds this phenomenon, and it makes this giant column. It goes way up, it jets up, and then convects up high, up into the stratosphere.
It's enormous and fast, moving at the astounding speed of 1 kilometer a minute, and it's loaded with ash.
Up in her airplane, a terrified Dorothy Stoffel watches the column form.
Honestly, it looked like a giant bomb. But with all the heat and the forces, it began to lift up. Eruption became 65,000 feet high. And I felt numb.
It's 8:42. 10 minutes after the eruption started, the giant plume stretches 15 kilometers into the air, nearly twice as high as an airliner's cruising altitude. The danger now isn't that the plume could rise even higher, but that it could dissipate and fall back down. The jet stream, a powerful air current appreciated for giving aircraft a boost of speed, will carry the ash cloud downwind. 540,000 cubic kilometers of pumice, a volume larger than the volcano itself, hang in the air, then plunge back down to Earth like tiny mortar shells.
The plume opens up like an umbrella, 25 kilometers to the west and 50 kilometers to the east. The plume grows and spreads very quickly. It moves eastward at 100 kilometers per hour, blanketing all the lands below in ash.
Vince Larson is on Mount Adams, 45 kilometers from Mount St. Helens. He snaps these last photos before the plume reaches him.
We could not see anything more than perhaps 30 meters away from us. The sun, which had been brilliant that morning, became obscured. At the same time, the ashes and a lot of debris were falling on the snow around us. Some of this was hot. My son David said, Dad, are we going to die now? And I said, no, Dave, I think we're going to be okay.
We see the mountain itself disappeared completely in a cloud of ash. Our entire sky turns dark, like big storm clouds. It was like a summer rain shower with large water droplets falling. And that's when the snow started turning dark and brown.
Everybody thinks about Pompeii and wondering, you know, are we having a real Pompeii experience here?
The same terrible thought runs through Keith Ronholm's mind. Behind the wheel of his pickup, he's trying to outrun the dangerous downpour. He's caught up in a real-life disaster film.
Now it's gotten to be pitch dark. I can't see my hand in front of my face, and because it's so black. Now I'm scared again. When the sky is falling, you get scared. And these are rocks falling from the sky. I was trying to drive down the road, and within a minute or so, these rocks started to fade away, but they were replaced with stuff that was sticking to the windshield, little drops of mud that became bigger drops of mud.
Until now, the cab of Keith's truck has protected him. But the ash is starting to seep inside.
And the ash is starting to now filter into the cab of the pickup. And I think, oh, I've got my ice chest next to me. So I grabbed a handkerchief and dipped it in the ice water, put it over my face. And so I'm breathing through this, trying not to breathe these ash particles.
The distressed young man comes across other fleeing cars. They appear to be guided by a big rig. He decides to follow behind.
We proceeded at a walking pace for 15, 20 minutes or so. It's pitch dark. The cars in front of me are stirring up the ash as they're moving. Yeah, at least you feel like you're making progress to getting away from the events happening behind, so it felt a little safer.
He barely has time to take shelter in a church basement when a new danger looms.
You can see the ash raining down in front of the streetlight. What's happening? You know, what's gonna happen to us? And, you know, are we gonna get hit by lava? And
a new danger does arise, but it's not lava. What comes next is far more dangerous. A lahar, a burning hot flow of fluid mud. A phenomenon all too familiar to volcanologists. Herculanum, the city next to Pompeii, was hit by a lahar and wiped off the map in a matter of minutes.
Nothing stops this tremendously destructive force.
A lahar is a mass of mud and rocks and boulders from a volcano that moves downstream very rapidly, usually caused by either debris avalanche or from snow and ice melt during an eruption.
And if that weren't bad enough, this is one of the most heavily wooded areas in the US. Like ogres, lahars uproot thousands of trees and send them crashing forward.
It basically cleans out everything. It cleans out the valley, it incorporates stuff, buries things. Any bridges or vehicles, anything in the way, get caught at it and buried or ruined.
It's spectacular. It looks like tons of matchsticks laid out the same direction for miles on end. We're talking about trees 30 to 35 meters tall, with giant trunks. It's staggering.
Venus's story illustrates just how violent it truly was. She and her boyfriend Roald are still asleep at their campsite in Tudel, 45 kilometers below the volcano.
We were still in our tent, and what woke the both of us up was the sound of the evacuation siren going off in the town of Tudel. We noticed the water rising extremely fast towards our tent, and so that's when we knew that there was something wrong and we needed to get out of the campsite. Roald tried to start the car, it didn't turn over, and by the time we looked up, we saw a huge train trestle coming at us. holding back a mass of logs and mud, and it came around the bend at the campsite where we were camped and unleashed the water and the logs surrounding the car. So there was no place to run. We could see trees being snapped down just like toothpicks as it came towards our campsite. It was a surreal sight. It's something out of a movie. So we jumped out of the car and jumped onto the roof of the car. And at that point, it just picked up the car and threw us into the torrent of water and logs and mud and started sweeping us down the river. You are in just a reactive mode, and so that's what we did.
The lahars and their torrent of uprooted trees are barreling down the slopes, as this aerial footage shows. Venus is thrown into the mudflow. Her boyfriend manages to stay on top of the floating logs. He tries desperately to save her.
He just kept screaming, "Hang on." He was on top of the debris and I was in it. And I was just grasping at anything that I could grasp onto, and the trees were as big around as I was tall. And it got pinched between two logs. And at that point, I was pulled down into the mud and my hand was stuck up between two logs. And at that point, everything went black.
It's 10 a.m. Journalist Jeff Renner and his cameraman, Mark Anderson, rush in aboard a helicopter. They're the first ones to fly through the volcanic cloud.
We couldn't see, it was all ash in the air, and we really couldn't see the mountain. But we could definitely see that over there it's blue, over here it's ash everywhere. The helicopter pilot says to us, "Okay, you guys, the FAA has put up a 40-mile exclusion zone. What do you think we should do?"
So Mark Anderson and Bob Wright, the helicopter pilot, and I all conversed and came to an agreement that yes, this is dangerous, but this is something that we are called to do.
Mark, Jeff, and their pilot defy the safety rules, putting their lives on the line to capture the first images of Mount St. Helens. They fly over the lahars that have carried away Venus and her boyfriend.
The river literally looked like it was boiling. Now, it wasn't hot, but it was just moving at such a velocity that it was obvious that this was a big eruption.
And as I was shooting, it was unbelievable because, you know, the world had been destroyed. It wasn't go here, go there. It was eyes wide open, just trying to shoot everything as we're going, because certainly we had no idea what was going to happen in the hours to come.
A few hundred meters below them, Venus Durgan's harrowing ordeal continues.
It was popping me up and popping me down, and I was just grabbing whatever I could to hang on to stay above the mud, but I kept getting pulled down because there was debris and timber underneath me. I had been down so long that I thought, this is it. I'm not coming back up again. I thought my life had ended at that point.
But her boyfriend refused to give up on her.
I felt Roald grab my hand, and with all of his strength, he pulled me up out of the mud. We started jumping from log to log, trying to get up a hillside and get to high ground. I was going in shock at that point because I was still trying to figure out what had just occurred. It's the craziest ride I've ever had in my life.
Venus is seriously injured. Luckily, she receives immediate medical care. Many other victims won't be as lucky. The Mount St. Helens eruption kills 57 people. Most die from asphyxiation. Others, like volcanologist David Johnston, likely one of the first people hit by the volcano's fiery outburst, have never been found.
There's no question that David and his work saved a lot of lives, and also because of his work and the work of his colleagues, helped us better understand volcanoes and gave us the gift of understanding what leads up to a major eruption to help save lives in the future.
The disaster took a heavy toll on the environment. The numbers are staggering. 500 square kilometers of forest land, 300 kilometers of roads, and 47 bridges were wiped out. Mount St. Helens and the pristine landscape it nestled in are unrecognizable.
But it was just so desolate, there was no sign of life anywhere. And it looked like a prehistoric landscape. If there had been a pterodactyl, one of those flying dinosaurs, that had suddenly flown out of the crater of the volcano, I wouldn't have been surprised.
It was, you know, like somebody had moved the mountain down.
Jimmy Carter, president at the time, struggles to describe the devastation.
Somebody said it looked like a moonscape, but the moon looks like a golf course compared to what's up there.
Terrifying in its enormity. Remarkable for the quantity and quality of first-hand accounts and images. The 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption remains a striking case in volcano studies.
For us volcanologists, there's a before and after St. Helens. It was a key eruption that's been widely studied. It occurred in the world's most technologically and scientifically advanced country, which had vast resources in 1980.
The comparison with Mount Fuji no longer applies. The explosion blew out Mount St. Helens' cone-shaped summit. With its old dome, the volcano looked like a mountain. Today, it is topped by a large crater, the indelible mark left by the disaster.
And it's sort of this sigh of relief that I survived this, and you know, I'm uninjured.
I say that all of life that I've had since May 18th, 1980, I call it my bonus. And I don't take life for granted. And I tell my friends and family, now remember, when you have a bad day, remember you're part of Dorothy's bonus.
It's kind of unbelievable to think back on it on 40 years that I actually survived something like that. It all seems like a crazy dream at this point. The human race is continuing to grow on this planet, but that's not going to stop Mother Nature from doing what it naturally does. And we need to have a plan in place to know how to, you can't mitigate it, you're going to have to learn to live with it and how to survive it.
In the surrounding wildlands, nature has sprung back to life. But Mount St. Helens is still the most active volcano in the U.S. It is monitored 24/7.
There'll be an eruption. But can we predict when? No. The phenomena could start tomorrow, as a matter of fact. They could start 10 years from now. They could start 100 years from now. We can't really tell. But is it going to erupt? Yes, of course.
Some 8 million people, 4 times the population of Paris, are now living in the state of Washington. And at any minute, this volcano-laden land they call home could change drastically, with the entire region spiraling once again out of control.